In this video, I will show you how to create this crazy 3D sword scene, and this is being used by Iman Gadzhi in his latest video. Since we're going to work with 3D elements, we're going to use Blender for this. And if you want to learn more about Blender and advanced editing, then do join the Social Creator Club Pro. In this community, you will get access to a lot of course material, which includes deep dives on Iman Gadzhi, but also on Blender and countless others. There's literally 100+ hours of content, and if that's not enough, you will still get access to stock platforms, which is already worth $100 a month alone. You will get access to the editing challenge where you can win a lot of money, and of course apply to potential clients that I send through to. Link of the Social Creator Club is in the description, and then let's jump into it. Now I'm here in Blender, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything. I'm going to press X on my keyboard, and I'm going to press delete because we don't need all of that stuff. And I'm just going to go to add, mesh, and then plane, because what I'm going to do is basically make these surfaces first. Basically with a 3D scene, you first want to set out the whole scene, and then later on we can animate things and add stuff. Here on the right we have the object properties, and then we can just scale it up. I'm just going to scale it up really big, maybe something like this. Actually I can also type it in 10, tab, and then 10, tab, and then this one can be 1. And then I'm going to go to the top here, and if you don't know this plugin, this is Blender Kit. This is a free plugin. I advise this to everyone. It's so nice. And I can just select a material here, and then I'm going to search for a stone, floor, and ideally we want something old. This looks really cool. We can just drag that and drop it. Now you might think nothing has changed. That's because you need to change the shading options. So we're gonna go and change this to rendered real quick, and then you can see that the tiles are definitely there. Now it is really dark, but we need to light it up later on. Now I have a couple of objects here, and I'm not just gonna drag them in. I'm gonna piece by piece put them in, and I'm gonna start with this. And we're gonna start with the top one, and I have an OBJ here. I can just drag that in, and then I'm just going to import it. This is great. It's just not on the right axis, and also I want to scale it down. It's a cool statue. I basically want to create a scene where there's multiple statues, there's some columns, and really gives like the old Greek vibe. Now since we still have this object selected, we can literally just change the rotation to 0 and change the scale to, for example, you can set it to 0.5 by 0.5 by 0.5. That will scale it down. It's still really big, so we need to check the other objects. Maybe I'm gonna set it to 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. And maybe we have to scale it up later on, but I think this looks pretty cool. Now you can also scale it by pressing S and then just dragging it up, so we can also do that later on. Actually, maybe something like this is actually pretty cool. I'm gonna click on this cross to make sure this material is gone, and then I'm gonna press G on my keyboard to move this around. And then if I just press Y, it will just be on the Y axis, so you can just move it to here. Now you can also go to the move tool and then move it like that. That's also the same thing. Now I have a column. I'm gonna drag that in. Same thing, import the F 2.0, and let's see how big this is. Way too big. This probably needs to be scaled down to 0.01, but let's see. Actually 0.1 is actually already quite cool. It looks cool. Again, I think it's still a bit too big. If you hold shift and middle mouse button, we can actually move around a bit here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move it and then see what we can do with this. Actually, I think the scale isn't too bad. Maybe we're gonna keep this like this. Now we're gonna duplicate a couple of these columns. Basically, I'm gonna right click on this column and then select hierarchy. So everything is selected. And then I'm gonna go to view, viewpoint, top. So basically we have a beautiful top view. Let's zoom out a bit, and this makes it a bit easier to position this. So let's position this first a bit more to the right, maybe a bit more to the top, and then press R for rotation, and then we can rotate it. There we go. Press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's move this to something like here. Press R to rotate it. Let's rotate this. There we go. And then we can do this a couple more times. So Shift D, press R for rotation. Maybe something like this, Shift D, then one here. And I think something like this is fine. We don't have to do the full circle because also I want some space for the camera here. Now that we're in this view anyway, I'm gonna right click and select hierarchy. Make sure this model of this statue is moved a bit. I think it's cool if this is set maybe here. Let's press R for rotation. There we go. Now that we're here, actually, let's drag in our other model, where we have also the OBJ. Let's import it. Again, way too big, way too big. So let's also select that and then put this to 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. It should be enough. It's also a bit rotated weird. Let's set the rotation to 0. Probably have to move this a bit also. And now if you just click the middle mouse button, you'll go back to the perspective model. And as you can see, this model is in the ground. Let's move this up a bit. And also I'm gonna rotate it back to its normal position. Just gonna do it manually so you can also copy these values when you're watching this. Let's see. I think this is as straight as it's gonna get. Let's move it down a bit. Perfect. I think this looks really, really dope. Also, where it's standing at, I think that's cool. Nice. Now there's 2 more objects that we need, and that's 1 a column and 2 is a sword. We already have these huge columns, but I also want a small column in the center. We still have this other column which is actually a bit different. Now we can just drag this in and make sure we use append and then go into object, and there we go. We have the object here. Press append, and I'm just going to scale this down by pressing S on our keyboard, and let's make sure that this is really tiny. Maybe something like this should work. Let's move this down. This looks really dope. And then for the last object, that is a sword, let's just drag that in like always, import. And this size is actually perfect, which is nice. Let's drag this up a bit and even more. And then we can also go here in the rotation and actually already rotate it a bit how we want it to look. I think something like this looks really cool. I'm not the biggest fan of this statue here. I think it's a bit weird with the hand. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna scale it up a bit. So I'm gonna click on this, press S, scale it up, and then I'm gonna press R for rotation, and then press Z to just rotate it on the Z axis. And let's move this a bit to the side, and then let's move it a bit. Now you might have noticed that it's super dark. That's because we need to light the scene, and that's what we're gonna do now. So for this, I think it's cool if we have a spotlight basically on this column. So I'm gonna go to add light and then spot. And then let's just drag this up to maybe something like here. Now we can go to this data property and basically increase the wattage, and this will make it brighter. And as you can see, it needs to be quite bright, and this already looks super cool, right? Now what I don't like is that it's a bit too harsh, so we need to change a couple of things. First of all, the radius. So if we increase the radius, the shadows will be a bit softer. I don't want it to be too soft because I do want to see the shadows. I think that's cool. And then we also have the beam shape, and basically what we can do is blend it a bit more so it's a bit more soft, and I think that's always a bit more pretty than having it really harsh. So let's just increase it a bit, maybe increase the size even also to something like this. And this is our first light. I'm really happy with this already. I think this looks cool. I'm gonna make it a bit more dramatic, and that's basically to use a spotlight like this also on the columns, but from the bottom up to the top. So what we can do is just hit Shift D to duplicate this light, and you can just move it a bit to, for example, like here. It doesn't really matter because we need to adjust it anyway. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the Y rotation to maybe something like 160 degrees. Let's then drag it down. Now this is already really cool. I just have to go into the light itself, and I'm gonna increase the size a bit, maybe even like something like this. I think it's really dramatic, right? Even on the statue. And we can do the same by hitting again Shift D, but then just moving it to the other side, something like this. And then of course going into the object property, and then let's move it even further, something like this. That's cool. What I'm also gonna do is maybe move it a bit, and I can also adjust these lights that they need to be a bit less bright. Now I want to quickly see what this scene looks like, but before we do that, we do need a camera. So I'm gonna go to add camera, and then we have our camera, and then I'm gonna go to view, align active camera to view. This will basically make the camera see exactly what we're seeing here. And then I have to just adjust it a bit. As you can see the rotation, let's set that to 0 here. And the Z also maybe to 0. And then the X rotation, maybe also a bit higher. So it's basically almost straight. And let's set the X axis to 0. So it's a bit centered. And let's move it a bit further and move it down by just dragging this down. And we already have a really cool setup. I think it looks awesome. Let's hit F12 to just quickly create a render. And as you can see, we've got a really, really cool setup. Now we can change the background to just black, or we can also add a wall here. In my opinion, it shouldn't matter too much because I'm going to add some shadow depth of field anyway. We can just go to the world, and then you have the color here, and then you can decrease the strength, or if you keep the strength like that, you can also change the color here. We can change that to black. Now let's render this again. It should change the lighting too. Makes it even more dramatic, which, I mean, it looks cool, but I also want the tiles to be a bit more visible. So it's good that we're testing this. I'm gonna add another light, and that's just a normal light. So just go to add light, and actually maybe just a area light would work. Let's move this up. Let's make this a bit bigger. Then go to data, and there we can increase the power of this. And as you can see, the more we do it, the more it will light up our scene. I think it doesn't have to be too much. It just needs a bit more extra, maybe to like 150. And then what I'm also gonna do, I'm gonna go back to our spotlight that we created. I'm gonna also make it blend even more. Let's render this again by hitting F12. Again, this looks super cool. Now I'm gonna go to the camera. I'm gonna go to the data of the camera, and there we can also turn the depth of field on. And then we can focus on the object. We can just select this and then make sure to select the sword by just clicking in the viewport, or you can also select it here. Then I'm gonna change the f-stop to maybe 1.2. Let's render this again. Maybe even zoom the lens a bit in so we have a bit more shadow depth of field. Then let's render this again. Oh, and would you look at that? That looks so nice. Things that make me happy. Now, of course, we can animate it. We can just go to the object now that we're here in the camera anyway. We can just go to the first frame and then of course set a keyframe for one of these axes. I'm only gonna animate the y-axis, so I'm just gonna set a keyframe. And then for example, we go to 150 frames and let's zoom this in a bit. And this doesn't even have to be much. I think a slow zoom is actually super nice. Then of course we can select all of these keyframes, right click, easing mode, interpolation mode, and then linear. This will make sure that it won't ease in or ease out. It will just have a constant movement. I think that just looks really nice. If you do want to have it ease in, then you can actually just leave it how it is. Of course, we want to rotate the sword too. So we can just click on the sword and then again, same thing. Let's move to the beginning. And there we have the X, Y, and Z. And I think like the Y axis could actually be really cool. So maybe we're gonna set this to 0.5, set a keyframe, go to also 150 frames. Let's move it to so it's straight. Something like this. And again, set a keyframe. As you can see, this looks super nice. Now to render this, of course, we need the settings, 1920, 1080, frame rate 24 frames per second. We can also change this to 25. And then the end, I want it to be to 150 so we don't render too much. Make sure the output is set right. Make sure that this is in a folder too. And of course, I'm just using PNG. Now for the render engine, Cycles is better in my opinion, but it just takes a lot more time on a lot of computers. So in a lot of scenarios, Eevee is actually pretty fine. If you set it on Eevee, you can even include ray tracing, which will actually make it even better in my opinion. And of course you can change the sample rate. The higher the better, but it will also be slower. But for this scene, we can actually get away with this in my opinion. I think it already looks super nice. And then when you add it all together, you will get something like this. And as you can see, I think this animation is super cool. You can also use this with any client, change the scene, change the objects, and you will get a really nice end result. I think a lot of clients will also be impressed if you show something like this. And if you also want to get more clients, then do join the Social Creator Club Pro. We have sales lessons. I drop clients in there, but you also learn how to become a better editor so you can attract more clients anyway. There's some great personal branding lessons in there too. So again, link is in the description. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to leave a comment of what you want to see next, and then I'll see you next time. Bye.